Here at Wildfire Marine, we've got a customer who brought in a newer SeaCraft. Him and his wife had taken the boat out, and his wife spotted some smoke coming from the deck. Luckily, he was smart enough to he popped the cover off and started separating all the wires, shut everything down, and kind of averted a pretty good disaster that was waiting to happen here. The wire that had burned when he had pulled the wires apart, the wire had settled down on top of a battery cable. Just below the battery cable, had that wire not landed on the cable, it would have landed on his primer ball. And also another thing that we noticed, that primer ball dried up and cracked, or you got a split in any of the lines, it would siphon the entire fuel tank into the bilge. It's quite obvious that this wasn't going to be just a rewire job for Debbie. It was going to take a team effort on both of us, because there was a lot of work. Just getting the wires out was going to be a big chore.
When I opened the door and I looked, the first thing I seen was my batteries, and then I seen my water tank. I couldn't believe that they actually put a battery on top of a washdown tank. It wasn't even secured. It was just floating. And then the battery, it was on the floor, only had one screw in it. It was, I mean, it was an accident waiting to happen. They would have had more than just smoke coming out of their bilge.
Access to this console was really tough, especially with the battery sitting right in front of the door on top of the water tank. Luckily, we found out that behind the cushion on the front of the console was a tackle storage area. So by removing that, we had a pretty good access to the whole front part of the console. One of the other things we do is we take the side doors off. You don't gain a lot more access, but you don't have to fight with the door banging around on you. And also, usually it's a lot less bloody because most of those doors are just screwed on. And when you reach behind to pull out some wires or anything else, it's inevitable your elbow is going to hit one of those screws protruding through the inside. So pull all that stuff all out, you got a nice clean opening to work with, and makes life a lot easier. We got another helper with us today on the boat, my granddaughter Carlissa. Having Carlissa on a boat's a little bit more of a challenge because she is a kid, and they love to, I mean, they're inquisitive. You turn around and her head's right by you, and I swear one of these days she's going to be able to do our job because she's just, she pays attention to everything you do and she mimics everything you do.
She's 22 months old. So to put her on the boat and work with me, all the sharp edges and whatnots, I put them up high, so of course she doesn't get to them. But she'll take my wrench, take my bag of tie wraps and flip them all over the place. It's an adventure.
Another issue, when we pulled the pie plate off underneath the leaning post to look at the wiring, we found out that the wires came directly down the center of the console and they all laid on top of the fuel tank. I'm not a real good fan of wiring laying on top of a fuel tank, because for the same issue that he had in the back of the boat, if one of those wires decided to melt, you really don't want it melting on top of your fuel tank.
You have to give them a spot to where they're off the fuel tank and going into a rigging tube. Just one little ignite, it's sitting on a fuel tank. Boom!
The hardest part was trying to pull them out because everything was run kind of haphazard and at different times, so everything was kind of tangled around each other. You would pull a wire, and at the other end you couldn't feel that wire. You were pulling a whole harness. And so what we ended up doing was we would cut one wire at a time, go to the midpoint, and see if we could isolate it. Once we isolated it there, we cut it again, and then we could pull it in from the console. And we basically did that wire by wire until we got everything out of there.
Battery cables were butt connected. I mean, there was just so many things going on with this boat. I mean, 4 butt connectors within 18 inches. So we pulled all the wires out of it.
Well, I'm happy we finally got all this stuff pulled out of this boat, because this was one of the worst, it was actually the worst rigging job I've ever seen in my life. But now that we have that all done, we're gonna go ahead and get this thing rewired and replumbed and turn Debbie loose on the wiring, and I'm sure this guy's gonna be happy with this boat. And it's definitely gonna be safer.
When we come back, the crew at L&H custom fabs parts for the brand new 43 build. This segment brought to you by Two Rivers Boat Works. Exceptional design, quality, and craftsmanship.